Hello, greetings from London. My name is Janet Ellis, and I'm here at the invitation of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the FAO, to discuss plant health. This year is officially designated the International Year of Plant Health, but of course, due to COVID-19, activities to promote the year have been extended beyond the first half of 2021. FAO and the International Plant Protection Convention are leading the work on promoting the year. The year is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to raise global awareness on how protecting plant health can help end hunger, reduce poverty, protect the environment, and boost economic development. The Director General of FAO has just appointed two hugely popular gardening experts to promote and champion the year, and they're going to join me in a moment. But before I introduce them, let's have a look at this short video.
I am life. I am home to millions, and I sustain millions more. My abundance brings prosperity, while my scarcity can be deadly. I cover much of the earth, and my influence extends far beyond. I have been around for longer than you can imagine. But my world is threatened. People need to take notice and do more to secure my future, because I am worth protecting. Your health relies on my health. Your life relies on mine. I am plants. I am life.
And that video really sums up what we're going to discuss here today. And joining us in County Wicklow in Ireland, we have Gavin, the garden designer and Chelsea Flower Show gold medal winner. As a broadcaster, Dermot presented gardening series for all the terrestrial broadcasters in Ireland and the UK, and he's authored 13 garden design books, including the best-selling Outdoors and Planted with the late Sir Terence Conran. And a bit nearer to where I am is Monty Don, who's joining us from Longmeadow in Herefordshire in the West Midlands of England. Monty has been principal presenter of the BBC's Gardener's World since 2003. He's also made acclaimed primetime series such as Around the World in 80 Gardens and Monty Don's Italian, French, American and Japanese gardens. He is a prolific horticultural journalist and writer, and his numerous bestsellers include the recent My Garden World and Monty Don and Diarmuid's American Gardens. Hello to you both. Now, before we start talking, I can see you're not in your gardens now, but just point to me, in which direction are your gardens?
Out there.
And mine are out there immediately behind me. I created a kind of veranda around the back of the house so I could garden on 2 levels. So it climbs up to meet me in my studio here.
Fantastic. Of course, we do know what both of your gardens look like, but it's still a treat to have you both sitting here, and I'm sure your spades and Wellingtons are just ready for when we finish. Now, to state the obvious, plants make up 80% of the food that we eat and produce 98% of the oxygen that we breathe. And of course, as with human health, protecting plants from pests and diseases is more cost effective than dealing with full-blown emergencies. But in a nutshell, why is prevention so important? To you first, Monty.
I think the first thing that one has to address is what is meant by plant health, because I think that that's actually quite a complicated thing. And as a gardener, a healthy plant is one that is best adapted to the situation that it's in. And it's not the biggest, and it's not the most productive, and it's the one that is most resistant and adaptive to whatever stresses and strains come its way. And that's, the gold standard, what you want from healthy plants. But obviously in terms of feeding people, different criteria come in. But certainly I do think that what really matters is that we build up a kind of resistance and adaptability and strength in plant production, whether it be for drugs or for food of any kind that is sustainable. And for me, as a long-term organic grower, the sustainability of health is really an important measure.
Dermot, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've always been interested in gardening, and when I left school, I did my apprentice in a way in a plant shop in Dublin city centre, and we sold plants, but we also sold a huge amount of chemicals, and that began to confuse me very early on. Chemicals that would intervene to make things rosier, bigger, kind of better. And we seem to have a 1950s attitude almost to gardening as housekeeping. We wanted everything to be perfect. And then I went to college in the Botanic Gardens in Dublin, and so many of the lectures were given over to treatments of things. And I was appalled because it wasn't what I understood about the soil or about plants. And I didn't think it was sustainable. So we have agreed, which isn't matched, I think, by the ecosystem that we need to look after. We live in countries where there's intensive farming, or more intensive, maybe not so much in these islands compared to some other places. But we must begin to realize that the last refuge of so much of wildlife is in our back gardens, our front gardens, or our parks. And we really need to look after that and to look after our plants in a way that's more in tune with everything else that lives on the planet.
Just to pick up on something you said there about working in a plant shop, presumably there were plants there from all around the world. And of course, we now travel way more than we did. We're much more sophisticated like that. We might think otherwise, but that is a fact of life. So what about bringing plants from other areas? How controversial is that? How mindful should we be?
Well, first of all, as gardeners and as farmers, we need to bring plants, from other areas. The plants that come in from around the world are a staple of our diet. So if we didn't have that, we'd be very hungry. We'd also be very bored with our gardens because we like color. We absolutely adore color. We love shrubs. An awful lot of the plant. We live in temperate environments. And that allows us to grow plants that have originated everywhere because in places right the way around the globe, because this part of the world never gets too hot, too cold, too wet, or too dry. So the world of horticulture is absolutely amazing, but we have to be careful. We have recognized from previous generations of what we term plant hunters, they have brought back plants that are really incredibly dangerous, not only to our environment, but to us as people. I was listening to something on the radio yesterday about the rhododendron that's taken over parts of County Kerry in southwest Ireland, which is a beautiful, rugged landscape. But in Victorian times, a species called ponticum arrived. It is very nice, but it takes over and it doesn't allow anything else to grow. So it destroys habitats for other species of animals and plants. And it's so hard to get rid of. So we have to be careful.
Monty, when you started gardening, were you very aware of that, or were you just seduced by the fact that something that could have been grown in Senegal could end up in your garden?
I certainly don't think I was very aware of any of the implications of bringing plants in from all over the world. I mean, it's something that even relatively recently has become much more to the forefront. I mean, I've been gardening for well over 50 years now, and I think it's only in the last 10 years or so that we've really noticed how catastrophic diseases can be if we bring them in untrammeled, how certain insects can come in plant material if it's not properly quarantined or checked or whatever. And also there is the other fact that if there is a consumer demand for a plant, it will be supplied even if it means the extinction of plants or the extinction of creatures that depend upon those plants. So there's all levels of sort of health that is needed of the ecosystem. both where the plants are sourced from, be they the other side of the world, whichever bit of the world you're in, or where they come in. And as Diarmuid said, I mean, we have this idealized growing phase, certainly for gardens, if not necessarily for all crops, so that bringing plants in has been very attractive because they all grow, you know, and if you just bung in a greenhouse and you can grow anything, you can grow absolutely anything in this country and in Ireland. So it's been seductive. And in fact, what we're now having to do is be much more disciplined. And as Diarmuid says, you're never going to stop people wanting exotic. All my children, for example, grow masses of houseplants because they don't have gardens, but they do want houseplants. And of course, they come from all over the world. And a lot of them, you know, they're in peat, or their chemicals are used, or they're taken from an environment where they are becoming increasingly rare. I mean, I was in America last year, and you know, cacti, for example, from the Arizona desert, which were everywhere, are now becoming endangered and rare because people are digging them up for their gardens, because they can be moved very easily. They're spiny, but they're very easy to move. So all these things come into play. But I think in terms of food security, making sure that plants are sustainable at source, and when they come in, are compatible with all the different vagaries that may not be a problem in their home territory. I mean, that's something that we've received with plants over and over again. You have a perfectly harmless insect, let's say, for sake of example, in Asia, you know, in the Far East, comes to this climate and then does extraordinary damage or whatever, or finds a food that will really cause havoc. So, and that, along with, as you were saying, with increased travel, we demand food from all over the world, every season, every day, and that is an inherent problem of plant health.
And also, I think we look for perfection, and that's particularly, I think, in these islands, and it just doesn't exist. And we pretend about it, and we celebrate, whether it's through shows like, you know, the Chelsea Flower Show or any flower show. We look for the biggest blossoms, the best blossoms. We encourage plants to be in flower when they wouldn't naturally be. We rip out plants that are, you know, trees that are growing a little bit crooked or whatever. And there's a cost to all of this. So our whole style of gardening, because it's something that we do very well, is slightly perverse and in some ways has become competitive. We need to not only consider the plants that we bring in, the food stuff that we bring in, but also what we look for from them, and the whole notion of, I think, showing off and display, because there's a cost to all of that.
I agree.
And to take you back to pests and diseases, which might unwittingly thrive here, what sort of steps can we take to prevent importing them? It sounds like a very big question, along with importing plants that people want to see.
Well, it is a very big question. I mean, obviously quarantine, for example, bringing in trees, is people have, again, I mean, Diarmuid knows this better than I do, because it's part and parcel of putting on any show garden, is you fly to Italy or Germany or wherever and you select your trees and they're shipped to you. But anybody can do that. I mean, I've got in my garden last winter, I bought in 16 Irish yews, which came from Germany with, you know, irony laid on irony. But because they were beautiful shape and beautiful size and the right price. But when we do that, increasingly, we're going to have to accept that a period of quarantine, as well as a certificate of health. So, for example, if you buy a tree fern, a Dixonia, it will come with a label that says this has been sustainably sourced. It hasn't been ripped out from the forest and just sold on the black market, so to speak. So, at two levels. On the one, yes, there we are. See, Diarmuid is showing us the label, which and source, you have to have some kind of policing to say this is a healthy plant, and B, a sustainable plant, and there are lots of levels that can be sustainable, and B, at arrival, that has to be cross-checked and said, yes, we accept this plant because it meets our standards of safety and health. And I think increasingly we have to accept quarantining. You just, I mean, certainly on a very basic level, if you go to a garden centre and buy any plant really, you should quarantine it in your garden before you plant it for a couple of weeks. It may well have vine weevil. It may well have, for example, there are various fungicides that are legal to use at a wholesale level, but not legal to use at a retail level. So nurseries will use them, and they don't stop fungus, they just mask the symptoms. So when that fungicide wears off, which it will do after about a week or so, the fungus may reappear. I mean, that sounds worse than it is. Most plants, that isn't a problem. But all of us have to be aware that we are personally and nationally responsible for what we receive and also for what we export and give out.
And part of that is the macro level, the industry of gardening, but there's the micro level too. When we go on our holidays to the Canaries and we take a cutting, a slip, a piece of a plant and bring it back, we just can't, and we shouldn't, even between these islands, we can't and we shouldn't, because there may be a price to pay. I'm always fascinated by those tea time documentaries, the border immigration police who go through people's luggage to see what they're bringing in. And that's, I think, a great way of making us aware that each country, for very definite reasons, if they're aware, have these rules and regulations. And we must, if we want to protect ourselves, but also everybody else and our environments, we must listen, we must learn.
If you've ever flown into Australia or New Zealand or Chile, for example, every trace of vegetable material, including tea bags, I've even watched one woman's dried fruits be taken because they were vegetable material. Every trace is taken off you. For example, Chile, which has the Andes down one side, it's a natural barrier. They have the ocean on one side, the Andes on the other. It is clean, it is secure by bringing anything in. Now, it's debatable to what extent people will tolerate that. But Dermot's absolutely right. There was a glamour. When I grew up, it was almost expected of you that you would take cuttings and you would gather seeds and you would smuggle a plant. I mean, people still do it. People give me plants all the time, wherever I am in the world, to bring home. Mm. And you either have to say to them, no, don't do that, you shouldn't do that, in which case you sound a prig, or you quietly dispose of it, or you give it to somebody locally, because we have to stop that happening.
It sounds to me as though one of the real principles behind the International Year of Plant Health is something that comes naturally to gardeners, and that's patience. None of this can happen straight away. And if your plant ownership is a little delayed, then presumably we have to accept that as part of the joy of growing.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. You do, gardening is a very humbling thing. You go out, you dig, you weed, you mulch, any of these tasks, and you're dreaming about, you're occupied in something that's repetitive, and you're dreaming about what will be. You're preparing something to plant. You're putting in tulips this week, which will come up next spring, because you have faith and you have hope. But now there, increasingly added to the mix of what you want, there is a growing awareness about what we need, how we need to garden for the environment. And sometimes that takes time, and sometimes that involves changing practices that have been with us for generations and changing ideas of what gardens are. We're in these islands, again, we're in an unbelievably privileged position to enjoy gardening as a hobby, but we're also almost in a new Victorian age of collecting things. I want that, I want that, I must have that. I saw that Dixonia on the television, I want one. And we never think about the price. Now, the price might be the financial price, but there can be many other prices to acquiring it, where it came from, and also how we plant it and how we look after it and what good it does in our garden for the environment. For instance, for pollinators, or the type of compost we use, is that a compost that's made from something like peat, which is peat-based, which is a finite resource. So there's lots of questions, some of which people rebel against and get very annoyed that you should question a method of gardening that has been passed on through generations, but it is a time to slow down in every way and think.
I think also that with gardening, we come from a tradition which began sort of the end of the 18th century. So it's about 200 odd, maybe 250 years old, where collecting plants was seen as a virtue in itself. And a garden that had the bigger collection of plants than another garden was by default better. And the rarer that plant was and the more difficult it was to grow, the better the gardener you were. So there's all kinds of human moral virtue imbued in this. And I think that what I 100% agree with Diarmuid and what he's saying is we have to learn again in almost redefine what is beautiful, that it is quite possible to have a beautiful garden with only half a dozen different plants in it. It's possible to have something that we barely alter. The gardening is of the lightest touch, and we maybe cut a path through grass, I visited a garden in France where the plants are planted and then never touched again. If a tree falls down, it's left. If weed grows, it's left. And the only gardening that's done is some vegetables and also paths every year cut through, and those paths then stay for a year. And this idea was the garden changed, it evolved, it adapted, it became weedy, it became pure. That was the beauty of it. And that's very left field. I mean, it's really hard for people to get to grips with that.
And Monty has just described that garden. I think it's quite right. The rules need to be changed, but it is happening. So that's the hope. It really is happening. People are beginning to think for themselves why we have this notion of daisies and dandelions in a lawn as being the enemy, when they're the only things in that lawn that will probably produce pollen. It's crazy. Or why we have this notion of lawns everywhere when, you know, we could be rolling in clover, which will...
The interesting overlap here, I mean, relating to, you know, why we're here and what we're talking is the relationship between what Diarmuid and I are basically talking about, because we're gardeners, is that relationship, that frame of mind, that attitude towards the natural world, towards plants, towards how we consume things, that goes right through to burgers and food and our bread, all the things we consume in our gardens and in our kitchens and our fast food shops and wherever it might be. It is actually all connected. There is a thread connecting it all because it's all about our attitude. This is why when you said about health of plants, actually, it's about how we think about health of plants that is as important as anything else.
Does that tap in a little then to what I'm thinking now, is that we are talking about the individual gardener really, or an individual attitude to gardening. But of course, a lot of plant health depends on the commercial production of plants. So how do we get to the producers and the people who are transporting and persuade them to just have a slight change of mind about how this works, from where it's grown to how it reaches us?
We have two things. The consumers have to look for and ask for plants that they feel meet their own criteria, whatever that might be. Because, you know, demand will influence supply. And also the trade, and that includes very large wholesale producers as well as small local ones, have to be challenged. You have to say, no, why are you doing this? Why are you using peat? Why are you using prophylactic fungicides and what have you? What is it you're trying to sell us? And actually, as Diarmuid's pointed out, very often it's an idealized version of a plant that has nothing to do with true health. And if we can break all that down, and people like Diarmuid and myself who can write about it or we can talk about it, gradually, and it's painfully slowly sometimes, but gradually people listen. And there is a new generation growing up who are as I said, they're my children's age, which are late 20s, early 30s, who actually care about this. They are not taking any crap. You know, they are dealing with this. And my generation has actually been quite responsible for some bad behavior in this respect. And it's our job to say, actually, we were wrong in lots of ways, but we can change. You know, it doesn't make us, we can change. And there are people who are now in their 30s, late 20s, who care, and they're going to do something about it. And we have to enable them.
I think that's exactly right. And the brilliant thing, we often hear about social media and the issues, but the brilliant thing about social media is that everybody has a voice and everybody can connect. Now, it's very important not to just connect in your own bubble and to take a stand and talk about what you believe in. But I presume Monty is like me, reading all the time and engaging in some of these conversations and, you know, demonstrating that there is a different way. And I think one of the lovely things that's happened in recent times is there's a new breed of young craft gardeners who get it, who absolutely understand, who question even the contemporary plant hunting, or if they do engage with that, they understand the obligations if they're going to find a new plant, what you do with it, why you do that, who benefits from it, and the care that really needs to be taken. So, and I have to say, Monty, you take a particular stand on some of these issues, and I think it's very encouraging to see. It's a radical stand, but it's very encouraging to see that stand, because I know it's a lonely place from the top, from the public face of British gardening.
And that new approach to gardening, does that include re-encouraging insect life? Because abundance has fallen by 80% in the last 20 years or so. But is this new generation doing something about that too?
Absolutely, absolutely. Janet, all I can say is the people who get it, who are going to be the promoters tomorrow, they really get it. And they're quite radical, and it's you know, it goes across the board. It also, they're interested in the fairness of gardening. They're interested in gardening history. They're interested in the Black Lives Matter whole thing. It's had a deep impact on the gardening industry. We're waking up to the fact that it just doesn't belong to us anymore. So it doesn't belong to us as a race of people, and it doesn't belong to us as human creatures. It belongs to everything, and we must take care of it. There's a certain arrogance in our institutions, in the way we garden and in the way that we prize it. We know May will come around every year, and we know the more conservative newspapers will pick on gardening and hold it up as a bastion of our different nations' pride. But the way we have done that, and maybe some of the people who have done that, there's a price to pay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, going back to the insect thing, it is really important that we do something about that. I mean, I think people, as Dermot said, are very aware of that now. That is out in the public domain. And, you know, all of us who are involved in public gardening of any form are encouraging pollinating plants, a succession throughout the year, diversity, not just, you know, bees are low-hanging fruit. Everybody loves a honeybee, but all the pollinating insects, you know, the many different types of wasps there are, and so on and so forth. So that is happening, and that is coming into the public awareness. What I feel more pessimistic than Dermot about is, I think the trade, the people who are producing plants, are still lagging behind the public. I think the new generation of the public, and even older people, are becoming much more educated about this. I think the trade has not quite caught up with that demand yet, for all kinds of reasons. Some of them because it's really hard making a living, and they're doing their best. And these are good, decent people trying, but not perhaps quite in tune. So I don't want to demonize them, but you know, there's work to do. I don't think any of us can feel complacent about it. There is a lot to do.
There is a lot to do, but I think it is going in the right direction. I think plant health and soil health are trending subjects when they wouldn't have been, when maybe elements of trade didn't want to hear about this 4 or 5 years ago. I think they do now because they know there is no alternative. They mightn't want to acknowledge themselves that there's no alternative, but it's what they're hearing back all the time.
I do think it comes back to this thing that new generation is taking on sort of family firms and what have you. And if you're 33, you've got a couple of young kids and they're little babies and their lives are ahead of you, you want to do something about that. You cannot just sit back. As a grandparent, I mean, I became a grandparent last year, you suddenly realize, I have got to make this world better for them. You know, it's a moral duty. You have to do that. And the way that it's going to be better, I think, and really what we're all talking about, is not by flooding the world with chemicals or quick fixes or cheap food that is not fundamentally healthy. We have to change more.
How can people without gardens help with this? Anybody watching this will catch the passion and be inspired by it. If you have no garden at all, how can you contribute?
What you purchase. As Dermot's been saying, I mean, look behind him, he's got houseplants. Houseplants are a huge thing now. You know, even if you live in one room in a shared house, there are people who have 20, 30 houseplants in that one room. And that is connecting. I used to be dismissive about houseplants. I used to think somehow they weren't the real thing and they were just, you know, I was completely wrong. They are really important to people. They really give a connection to not just to plants and gardening, but to the world, you know, and this is a generation that's grown up traveling. And so I think that's important. And also, you know, step outside your front door. There are trees in the street. There is a park. There is a sky above you. It's all connected. It's all one. And a garden is a really good front line to connect with nature. But if you haven't got one, it doesn't mean to say that you're disempowered from all that, you're disenfranchised. You know, it's your sky, it's your street, it's your park, it's your houseplants, and they are all important.
Well, the FAO hopes to film with you in your garden in the spring, Monty, but just to whet the appetite for gardens, let's have a little look at you in your garden, Janet, that you filmed earlier this year.
I'm Gavin. Plant health is under increasing threat from climate change, environmental degradation, and pests and diseases. As with human health, protecting plants is far more cost-effective than dealing with full-blown emergencies. For further information, visit fao.org/IYPH to see how you can contribute.
That looked very lush. When was that filmed?
That was August. So in the middle of, yes, a nice sunny day. I've taken out all the lawns. I've replaced that by a jungle. And it was just glorious. That's been one of the strange things this year, getting to spend every day here during lockdown and get to know the plot. But as you know yourself, your garden is never finished.
I mean, one of the odd things about lockdown for me is I worked out that I spent more days, more time in this garden than I have done for 25 years.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds crazy, but yeah, it's for a gardener, it has been there's been plenty of silver linings with it.
Yes, and you slow down, your life slows down, but once you're out there, you slow down and you appreciate every sunrise, every sunset, every backlit plant in the evening. To observe plants on a daily basis is such a privilege. And of course, we are the lucky ones. You know, I don't think we should ever forget that. Gardening maybe starts out as a hobby, but we are the lucky ones who get to enjoy it, who can undertake projects, who can purchase plants, who can afford to get the good quality, well-rotted manure delivered or whatever.
That is so, but one of the things that actually has really inspired me, and I know a lot of other people this year, as I said, we had all these films sent to us on Gardener's World. Very often the most inspiring were people who use yogurt pots and who use dirt from the garden, who recycled things, whose labels were made out of lolly sticks, who save seed from tomatoes they bought in a supermarket or whatever it might be. So on a really low key, low budget, unambitious level, created magic, absolute magic.
And I got chickens.
Did you? Good.
I got 3 chickens, so I'm almost a farmer.
And should we all be trying to grow fruit and veg?
Yes, yes, of course we should be. Of course we should be, as much as possible. And not to be self-sufficient, because the truth is, all experiments at self-sufficiency result in extremely boring food, malnutrition, and heartache. You know, I mean, it's really, really limited to do that. But it is amazing how you can enrich your diet and expand it by growing really quite not very much, you know, just a few things in pots, some fresh salad leaves, maybe some espaliered fruit against a wall. And the great thing is to grow things as a treat. You know, if it's your birthday, make sure there's a harvest you can have on your birthday. If it's an anniversary, if it's whatever it might be, just grow things as a treat and celebrate.
And it's easy.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
Now, you have both worked around the world. Is gardening an international language?
I think it is an international language, but it's not an international obsession. So you go to many different countries that gardening is still something of the grandparents and still something that revolves around conifers and fruit and vegetable production. I think in these islands, it's part of the national psyche, and in emerging markets, they very much look to the UK and to Britain to see what happens, because there is this great charity, the RHS, the Royal Horticultural Society, which has amassed an amazing amount of knowledge and expertise in both the science and the crafts in gardening. So it is an international language, all right, but because of relative prosperity and because of the climate, the center of world gardening is probably the UK.
I mean, I think definitely, having, you know, really traveled a lot and seen gardening all over the world, very, very few countries have anything like the same obsession with gardening that the UK has and Ireland has. And obviously somewhere like Japan, there is a very sophisticated culture that is very well developed. But most countries have a different relationship, but it's not uniform. So if there is a language, it has many dialects. But one of the things I find fascinating is, in the UK and Europe at large, we have tended to have an idea that there is one way of gardening, that we know how to do it, that it belongs to us, that we have explored it and developed it and made it sophisticated. And there is a history, a long, complicated and incredibly interesting history about it. But there are other ways of doing it, whether it be in South America or Borneo or wherever. And Dermot referred to this earlier, there has been a cultural arrogance that we have assumed that we have the right to own plants, skills, design. And what has happened very recently, I mean, it really is the last few years, is people are saying, no, that's not necessarily true. We need to at least think about that, if not change it. And I personally don't find that at all threatening. I think that is really interesting.
It seems to me, extrapolating from the conversation that we've had, that there is something in the simplicity of listening to plants, listening to each other, as individual gardeners looking to the community of gardeners, which is going to be incredibly beneficial for plant health in the years to come.
Couldn't agree more. Yes.
Just as a sidebar for my own interest, is there ever a time as gardeners where your work is done, where you can genuinely sit in your own gardens with perhaps a beverage of your choice, not necessarily, and just for that moment, really enjoy it? Or is there always in your peripheral vision more work to be done?
I'm quite good at relaxing at the end of the day and listening to the bird song, watching the sun, disappear beneath the trees. I have a few different areas with seats in them. I really quite like that. There's always a point in any project, and I've done maybe 9 or 10 gardens at the Chelsea Flower Show, which is both exhilarating and appalling at the same time. But there's always a point where it's exhilarating, and because if you love nature and you appreciate soil, appalled and exhilarated, because then you say, well, it's a flower arrangement and that's an art form in itself. But there's always a moment you have to say, it's done. And there's always a moment here that you have to say, I'm done.
You see, I'm slightly different, is that on one level, my knee-jerk response is, it's never done. I'm never finished. I never feel that I can sit back. And that's sort of true. On another level, and increasingly as I get older, I really like walking around the garden, usually with a camera, just looking at things, not judging it, just looking at the shapes of things and the light and the colors. And if I'm lucky, and I mean, I need the camera to be that third party, it's harder just to do it without. But that, I think, is the sort of the wisdom that comes with age. But for much of my life, I've been a very muscular gardener. I've got to do more, got to do this, push on. And I'm trying to unlearn that. And the analogy I like to use, because I find it helpful, is don't think of a garden as a place. Think of it as either a stream or a river or air moving through, like a cloud. And you share that space. At any moment, you're there and it's there. But it's no more still than your life is still. And so at any point, you're both present in the same time or place, but that is never going to be the same again. And that's fine.
That's right. And it's living all the time. The soil is pulsating.
Yeah.
It expands, it contracts, it has all these layers of stuff, some stuff that we can't even see. It's so tiny going on. Then you have the worms, you have the seeds, you have the shoots, you have leaves unfurling, you have everything following the sun like solar panels. And we don't see that at a glimpse. But it's this amazing microcosm of life. It really is. It's an extraordinary thing. And in a way, even at this time of the year, you're thinking of collecting seeds, or you're feeling very sorry that the frost has got your dahlias or whatever. But there's always a dream behind that. What comes next? What will you do better next year?
That is the most marvelous way to end this, because there we have the absolute privilege of sharing this planet with plants. And we have had an amazing privilege in listening to you two discussing it. It's been beguiling and inspiring, and I can't thank you both enough. And I'm very grateful to the FAO for bringing us together. And of course, you can follow Monty, Don and Dermot on social media, and you can follow the FAO there too, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you choose, Instagram perhaps, and find out more about the issues raised in this programme. And I'm sure I'm speaking to everybody listening who's utterly converted to wanting to know more. The address where you can find all the information is about to appear. Oh, and there's also a photography competition, which is open to professionals and amateurs alike. The deadline for your entries is the end of the year. So again, get all the details. Monty, Don, Dermot, Gavin, protecting plants, protecting life. I can't thank you enough. It's been absolutely wonderful to listen to you. And from me, Janet Ellis, goodbye.